I'm Dom from Solida, and today we'll be talking about stakeholder mapping, why it's important, and how we can use Notion to conduct it effectively. What is stakeholder mapping? Well, it's the process of analysing and visually representing your stakeholders according to key criteria. Typically, the criteria will focus on the extent to which they impact your project or work, and the output will be a set of guidelines on how you should handle your relationship with those stakeholders. That last point really highlights the benefit of stakeholder mapping. Having a way to represent this to you and your teams to figure out how best to think about different stakeholders provides a great starting point when devising communication strategies and overall project plans. If you follow a specific method, then it can drive consistency in how you handle stakeholders across all of your work. So today we're going to look at how we can use Notion for our stakeholder mapping. To do this, I'm going to focus on two methods of stakeholder mapping: Mendelow's matrix and salience types. Mendelow's matrix categorizes stakeholders by their influence over the project and their interest in it. The output is a guideline on what and how to communicate with the stakeholder, depending on which box they fall into on the matrix. Salience types looks at stakeholders by their power to influence the project, the legitimacy of their relationships with the project, and their urgency to see the project successfully completed. The output is a classification of stakeholders that gives you an idea of how to anticipate the actions of the stakeholder. This one, I think, gets better with time. The more you conduct this exercise and build up corporate memory, the more easy you'll find it to conjure a strong picture of what to do and how to approach these different salience types. This diagram here from stakeholdermap.com shows really clearly how these three criteria combine to create the 8 different salience types. Okay, so now we know what we're building, let's get into it. I'm going to start here with a table that has a few made up stakeholder names in it. In reality, you might have more information than this in your client or stakeholder database. You could have contact details, project statuses, etc. We'll start by adding the criteria we need for Mendelow's matrix. And that first one is influence. We want it to be a select property with high and low as the two options. And we'll just make high red and low blue. And let's give it an icon. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll duplicate this and change the name to interest. There we go. That's the second criteria we need for the matrix. Now I will go through and fill this out for each of our stakeholders. With that complete, we now need to create the formula that will tell us what our engagement strategy should be, and another one that will tell us the engagement frequency. Now, for the engagement strategy, we'll have 3 options across the 4 boxes in the matrix. So high and high will equal inform, consult, and collaborate with this particular stakeholder. Low and high in any combination will be to inform and consult with the stakeholder. Low and low will be simply to inform them. So to do that, we want to create a formula We'll call it engagement strategy. And we'll be using an IFS formula, which is new to Notion Formulas 2.0. This is very similar to the video I made on action priority matrices, which I will link in the description. I'll also link some of the materials explaining the background on both Mendelow's matrix and saliency types. Back to the formula we need. We'll start off by calling the IFS function by typing in IFS and an open bracket. Now we'll use Shift and Enter to start a new line. This will just keep things neat as we go on. So let's start with a situation where influence is high. So we'll call the property's name. And we'll use double equals to show that we want this exact outcome. And we'll type in high to tell it what outcome we're looking for. We'll use an and to tell it we have another condition that needs to be satisfied. And we'll repeat that process again for interest. With that complete, we'll use a comma to move to the if true part of the equation. So if you move your cursor to just behind the bracket on the ifs statement, you can get a description of the equation and the nomenclature around the different sections that comprise it. So going back to this if true section, we need to tell the equation what to output if both influence and interest are high. This will be a suggestion to treat this stakeholder with an abundance of communication. So we want to keep them informed, consult them on decisions, and collaborate with them whenever possible. To differentiate this output from the other ones we can use dot style to edit the text. I like to make label outputs like this a code block. So we'll start off with a C in speech marks. And let's make it bold using a B also in quotation marks. And then finally, let's give it a color. Let's make it red. That will show that this client is one we need to pay a lot of attention to. So I'll go through and fill this out for all of the other combinations quickly. Okay, that's complete now. One thing I always like to do is make the final condition, so where influence and interest are both empty, a suggestion to categorize that particular stakeholder. That way we don't miss anyone out. So as you can see, I hit done here. And these are all pulling through now. Next, let's use this same formula for the engagement frequency. So here for high influence, high interest stakeholders, we want to manage them closely. The difference here though is we will be differentiating between low and high when the low is for influence or when the low is for interest. When influence is low and interest is high, we want to communicate with them on an as needed basis. And when it's the other way around, so influence is high and interest is low, we want to communicate with them on a cadence that keeps them satisfied. So this could be some kind of regularly scheduled meeting, something like a weekly working group. And finally, when both are low, we simply want to inform them of decisions. We don't necessarily want to proactively consult with them on things. So I'll just duplicate this property here, change the name to engagement frequency, and then we'll edit the formula. One thing you might notice when you paste formulas in is that any properties will not actually immediately crop up as properties. You just need to highlight them and then click on the relevant property, which is just what I'm showing you here. Okay, so that's working now. And we can see that this is pulling through. So with all the information required to create a Mendeley matrix, let's move on to the salience types. We'll be using the same IFS formula to do this, but now we are upping the categories from 2 to 3 properties. We have power, urgency, and legitimacy, all with high and low select options, which I will create now. Okay, so these have all been added to the table and I've filled them out for our stakeholders. Let's start creating our formulas. Oh, I should also point out, I've just taken the opportunity to kind of tidy up the column spacing and sort out some of the icons. So we'll call this property salience type, and we will keep the same layout as before. We want to look at a scenario where power is high, urgency is high, and legitimacy is high. We would want that to match up to the middle of the Venn diagram we saw earlier, which looks like this. So that would be a definitive stakeholder. They will be pivotal to the success of your project. Because of that, we'll stick to the same formatting system as before and make those red. So let's start typing out what this would look like. So we have an IFS formula again. We want power to be high, and we want urgency to be high, and we want legitimacy to be high. As we discussed, this would be a definitive stakeholder, and we want to stick to the same styling as we did before. So that would be code and in bold, and as the stakeholder is important, they will be red. Let me just close that bracket off. I'll go ahead and finish this for the rest of the stakeholders. With the equation complete and hopefully starting to look very familiar by now, we have a type for each combination of our 3 criteria. We can use this to try and understand our stakeholders. One thing I do want to mention as we move on from the formula is that all 3 of the formulas we've looked at in this video are in the description below for you to paste into your own Notion spaces if you want. This template is also included in the link below and is free to use, so please enjoy. And if you're enjoying this video so far, please like and subscribe to support the channel. So with all of our information filled out now, there's a couple more things I want to add to this table before we move on. The first is just a simple notes section, which I think is really useful for an exercise like this, so you can note anything interesting about a stakeholder that maybe doesn't quite fit into some of these categories. And the other one I want to add is a select property. I'm going to call it stakeholder type. And this won't use any fancy formulas, but we'll simply have a few options here. So we'll have key stakeholder, primary stakeholder, secondary stakeholder, and non-stakeholder. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because sometimes you don't necessarily in the instant have time to kind of conduct an exercise like this, which you might want to do with your entire team or in its own session. And having a property that you can just really quickly add information to kind of as you become aware of it or as you think of it is really helpful. So I'll just quickly edit this and we'll move that across to here, and I will fill this out for our stakeholders. And one last thing I wanted to do before we moved on as well is add a few views to this. So the current view can be the workhorse view where you can sort of see all of the properties, and I've called this view all. So you kind of know that this is the view to go to when you want all of your information in one place. Now let's duplicate this view and call it Salience type. And we will hide everything to do with the Mendeley matrix. And we'll do the same thing again for the matrix. There we go. And then finally, we'll want a view that highlights just the most important stakeholders. So we'll make this one a gallery view, and I mean, we could filter on any of the categories we came up with. So for example, let's filter on an engagement strategy that is to inform, consult, and collaborate. But you obviously could filter on any of the different mapping that we did. So you could filter on salience type, or you could even filter on stakeholder type and just filter key stakeholders. Now let's tidy this up. So we probably want to be able to see some of the information that we've mapped out. So let's make engagement strategy, engagement frequency, and salience type. Actually, let's make stakeholder type visible as well. And let's change the layout. So I don't want to see the database title. I don't want a card preview. We just want to see the information that we've mapped out. And I think the card size, it probably looks better medium, doesn't it? So we'll call it key stakeholders, and I always like to give my most focused views an eye symbol and move them to the front. So every time I open this, I can immediately see my key stakeholders, my key pieces of information. Okay, so now let's build a Mendeley matrix. Let's first give this section a name, and we'll start off by creating a callout box. We'll call this one high influence, low interest, because that is going to be the part of the matrix that is in the top left. And this group was colored green, which we can see if we go here. It was the inform consult group. So let's color this box green. Let's give it a green icon. Perfect. Okay. Underneath, let's add the two tags that are associated with that combination. So the two tags are the engagement strategy, which is to inform and consult. And then the other one is the engagement frequency, which is to keep satisfied. And then let's edit this to make it look like code. And you can use Command E to do this. And now we just need to edit them to make them green. There we go. The next step is to create a database view of the table we made above. So we'll make a gallery view. And we want a new empty view. We want it to be a gallery. We want to hide the database title. And now we want to add a couple of filters. So we want the engagement strategy to be inform and consult, and the engagement frequency to be keep satisfied. So before we move on, let's just confirm that that matches the table above. So we have Tom, inform and consult, keep satisfied. Brad, inform and consult, keep satisfied. Perfect. And just to make things a bit neater, you can get rid of the title in a view tab by just entering a space. And we'll just give it a consistent icon across all of the views. So the last thing we want to do is just move that up into the callout. Now we've done this for one group, I'll go ahead and duplicate it to create the matrix. Okay, so now we have our Mendeley matrix where we can see the names of each stakeholder are in the correct part of the matrix. The next step is to go ahead and do the same thing for salience type. So I'm going to follow the exact same structure here where I create different callout boxes, different colors, and then filter on the criteria for each box. Okay, so this is the same thing again, but for the salience type. As you can see, the only difference is that we have a 4x2 matrix rather than a 2x2 one. And here we have a complete stakeholder mapper with a table at the top and a visual representation of both the Mendeley matrix and the salience type. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as I said, this template, the formulas, and more information on the concepts discussed can all be found in the description. Thanks for watching.